Alright, folks, I am back once again, and it is time to give my predictions for what I think could possibly be shown to be revealed as some big things in this year's Pokemon Presents for Pokemon Day 2024. But first, let's start off with what we know for a fact likely will not be there. Well, is pretty much confirmed, it's pretty much guaranteed to not be at Pokemon Presents, is the announcement of a Gen 10 game. And the reason being for that is because they like to, is because historically, Pokemon has only done new gens every 3 to 4 years or so. Good example, Gen 1, being Kanto, came out all the way back in 1996. So the 30th anniversary for that is going to be coming up 2 years from now in 2026. So 1996, of course, being the first year, and of course being the release of Gen 1. But that originally came out in Japan. We didn't get those games until almost until sometime in 1998. I think the fall of 1998 was when we got those in North America. Then the following year, 1999, was when Gold and Silver came out and then of course we got Gold and Silver, I believe, in late 2000. Because keep in mind how is it used to work is that Pokemon would games would come out in Japan first, followed by a North American release months later, or in the case of the Gen 1 games about 2 years later. Then 2003 saw Ruby and Sapphire release on the Game Boy Advance, and this also marked the first time, the first generation where games from previous generations were remade. In this case, Fire Red and Leaf Green being remade being remakes of Red and Green. And then 2006. Now, of note, those were the only mainline Pokemon titles, by the way, to release on the Game Boy Advance. Generation 4, of course, which consisted of Diamond and Pearl, released in 2006. In 2006, and took players to the Sinnoh region. And let's just say those games were known for not having very many fire types. I mean, sure, there was the standard fire type Chimchar at the beginning of the game, but then the only other fire type you could possibly get after that was Ponyta. Yeah, that's not good. But, but now, Gen 3 games, of course, as you know, took place in the Hoenn region. Gen 2, of course, was Johto, and Gen 1, as I just mentioned, was Kanto. Then 2010 was Black and White, which was pretty much a soft reboot for the franchise, as during the main story of that game, only Gen 5 Pokemon were available, meaning you couldn't get the older Pokemon until post game. So post game. That was now of note. That was also the first, and to the best of my knowledge, only Gen to actually have sequels rather than third versions. Up until that point in the series history, the first four gens had third versions. And this is the case of Red and Blue. Yellow was the third version for that. Crystal being the third version for Gen 2. Emerald being the third version for Gen 3. And Platinum being the third version for Gen 4. Those were always the more definitive versions of each game. Meaning, you ended up with a little bit of extra content and a little bit of extra story that wasn't included in the main pair. But Gen 5 changed things up a bit, of course, by having direct sequels called Black 2 and White 2. And in those, that pair of games offered a brand new storyline. But the gyms, for the most part, were the same. And we still had to, go for. Of course, the region was the same because those games were set in Unova. Then, two, now those sequels came out in 2012. 2013 was really when things started to change. Because 2013, of course, was when X and Y came out, and that also marked the first time in the history of the franchise that the games released simultaneously worldwide at the same time. It's also worth noting that that pair of games did not get a third version or a sequel. Then Then, of course, 2016 saw the release of Sun and Moon, followed by more enhanced versions, Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon, the following year in 2017. And those games, of course, all released on the 3DS. Then 2018 saw the release of Pokemon Let's Go Pikachu and Let's Go Eevee, which, of course, were those were essentially HD remakes of Pokemon Yellow, except Pokemon Yellow. And of course, it was also known for being the first pair of Pokemon games to be released for the Nintendo Switch. Then, of course, 2019, you had Sword and Shield, which, of course, was Gen 8. And then, of course, the most recent pairing of games in 2022 with Scarlet and Violet. And that's a rundown of the entire history to this point. And no, for those wondering, no, I'm not counting the spin-offs like Pokemon Snap, Mystery Dungeon, etc. Anyway, so now that so based on this history, I would expect that Gen 10 probably would not be announced until around this time next year in 2025. So that's how I know for sure. We know for sure that a Gen 10 announcement likely will not be in this Pokemon Direct. As for what could be there, well, there are a few possibilities that I've had in mind. One would be remakes of some of the older games. In this case, Gen 2 or Gen 5. Now, I've actually discussed this with a few people on Discord, and basically the consensus that I've gotten is that if it's Gen 2 remakes, it would likely be in the Let's Go style, a la Let's Go Pikachu and Let's Go Eevee. Which wouldn't be the worst thing in the world. It's just a matter of whether it would be necessarily something that the Pokemon community would actually want. But then again, there are some people who actually have never played Gen 2 before, probably because they might not have had an interest at the time, or they may not have been old enough to play video games at the time, or they just weren't born yet when those came out. So those could be reasons for why some people may not have played Gen 2. Another remake possibility that I've had is Gen 5 remakes. Now, of course, the Gen 5 games being a more recent title would probably be the better option of the two, honestly. And of course, if they did that, then they would likely go in the direction of the chibi art style that they did for the Diamond and Pearl remakes, which remakes Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl, which released on the Switch in 2021. So it probably could be that, but that game would likely be developed by ILCA, who of course was known for cutting corners and basically doing the bare minimum with the Diamond and Pearl remakes by not including any of the Platinum content. Now, since Black and White had sequels and not a definitive third version, you would think that a potential Black and White remake would probably pull some content from Black 2 and White 2 and include it in potential more enhanced versions. But knowing ILCA, they probably would not do that. But again, we'll just have to see. Or there's a possibility we could get a new spin-off game, like say a new Mystery Dungeon. I mean, don't get me. And from what I saw, the remake of Mystery Dungeon Rescue Team that released on the Switch in early 2020, right before COVID, it didn't sell 20 million, over 20 million, like what Scarlet and Violet did, but it still sold pretty decently. So I would think that should at least be good enough for a new Mystery Dungeon. Or maybe possibly a new Pokemon Legends game. Because if you remember, Pokemon Legends is still a brand new spin off IP, and the Legends Arceus came out in early 2022, a couple of months after Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl came out, and from what I remember, that game was well received by the Pokemon community, mainly because it was known for changing up the formula a whole lot, where you still had to catch them all. Like, that part of the game was still the same, but now you can. It was basically more like a stealth-like game where not only could the Pokemon take damage, but the character could also take damage as well. So that's actually what made that game a bit more difficult. So maybe new Legends game, like I could be shown. I honestly have no idea. The third possibility that I have would be finally adding the classic games from Gens 1 through 3 onto the Switch Online service. The only problem, which wouldn't be a bad thing, but think, I think if they were to do that, like adding those older games to the Switch, I'm thinking that Pokemon Company / Nintendo would probably rather offer those classic games as individual downloads on the eShop rather than on the Nintendo Switch Online service. And mainly because putting those on the online service would mean you would only be renting those games, and then of course if your NSO runs out, you basically lose access to those games. At least if you're on the expansion pack tier. If you're on the regular tier, which just has NES, Super NES, and regular Game Boy, then obviously you'd be fine. I mean, you'd still be able to play Gen 1 and 2 on there, since those would fall under the regular Game Boy NSO, but the expansion pack NSO, which would have the Game Boy Advance, you would basically lose access to the Gen 3 titles if your NSO expansion were to run out from there. So I think for that reason, if they were to offer the classic games on the Switch from Gens 1 through 3, like I said, they'd probably offer them in the eShop as individual downloads, and you would obviously have to buy them separately. But separately because, well, of course, Game Freak only cares about money. And so, well, Game Freak / Nintendo / Pokemon Company, they all only care about money. That's really what it boils down to. So that's what I'm thinking could possibly be shown as kind of like the big thing in this present. Everything else is probably going to be stuff that's already known about, like the Pokemon Concierge series, Netflix series, which I heard is getting a second season, by the way, and stuff like that. So, but we'll see what happens. So that's going to be it for me. Those are basically my predictions for what I think could be in this Pokemon Presents. What was not mentioned in the post that the Pokemon Company made on their Twitter when they announced this was how long the presentation was going to be, but my guess for that is it would probably run at least 25 minutes. Possibly 30, but again, I have no idea. We'll just have to see what happens when this Presents airs on Tuesday, and I will be reacting to this, by the way. Alright, so that is going to do it for me, and I will see you next time.